dialogue. This is often a critical issue with RPGs for many people, myself included. And so in this video I'm going to talk about what I want to see from the dialogue system in the next Elder Scrolls game. Now what I'm not going to talk about in this video is writing. Obviously for good dialogue it needs to be well written. I will talk about style and the sort of dialogue I might want to see, but I'm not going to come out and say it needs to be good writing. We all know that the writing needs to be good, and there are plenty of examples of great games such as The Witcher 3 where the writing was superb and it really helped engage with the story and with the characters. I'm going to put that one down as a bit of a sort of no-brainer. We need good writing. What I actually want to start with is a somewhat more complicated subject, and that subject is, well, I suppose we could call it quantity. Now I love lengthy dialogue. There's a mod called Enderall which is a total conversion mod for Skyrim, and the conversations in that particular mod can go on for ages. You can have a single conversation that easily goes on for 15 to 20 minutes with tons and tons of lines, loads of dialogue, and it's pretty well written dialogue too, and it's absolutely brilliant. But I do accept that I may be a little bit on the extreme side. I have a very heavy tolerance for lots of dialogue. I even enjoyed the game Vampire, which is pretty much a talking simulator, so I like lengthy conversations. I accept that there's probably some sort of balance to be met. Now if I look at the previous Elder Scrolls games since Morrowind, that's Morrowind, Oblivion and Skyrim, Morrowind stands out as the most verbose of the three games. It had the most dialogue, or at least I seem to remember that being the case. It's probably fair to point out that Morrowind really did have quite a lot of repetitive dialogue, a lot of shared dialogue that pretty much all of the NPCs would engage with and give you almost identical answers in most circumstances. So it probably seemed more verbose than it actually was. However, overall I think Morrowind it gave me more of a sense of being able to speak to people. But it also felt a little impersonal at times, like the NPCs were really just giving you information rather than having a conversation. Part of that could be because it didn't use voice lines for most of the NPC dialogue, but it is also the writing itself, and whilst I said I wasn't going to get into the writing, when you have a lot of dialogue, what you're expecting are more personal stories almost, or at least more personal opinions. So if you ask someone the way to the Fighters Guild or to describe the different guilds, when each and every single character says the same thing about the Fighters Guild, it feels less like a conversation and more like a brochure. So in those circumstances sometimes I almost feel less is more. So this is a difficult one. There is also the downside to more dialogue being you do require more voice lines if you're going to have voiced NPCs. Now the subject of voiced NPCs is actually a little more complicated than you might think. My initial reaction is yes please, I vastly prefer voiced NPCs to non-voiced NPCs. This is one aspect where Oblivion and Skyrim beat Morrowind for me.
I don't know what Archmage Traven has against necromancy, but the first thing he did after taking over the Mages Guild was to ban its practice.
However, it's kind of like the voiced protagonist. It's a bit of a personal thing, and it's not a simple matter of saying one is better than the other. It's a side grade. It's a different way of doing things. I like to hear the different NPCs with different voices, and it gives me an idea of what the developers, what in this case Bethesda, had in mind for that character. They gave the character a face, they gave them a past, a story, and they gave them a voice. So for me it's the complete package. They are presenting me, the NPC, and I get to play off that NPC. Even though, as a protagonist, I like to be able to set my own face, my own voice, and my own backstory. So I've kind of created the character, but how the character interacts with the world in many ways is restricted by the developer's idea of what the characters in the world are like. I like that mix. However, I do understand some people want to be able to imagine different characters with different voices. When you read a book, you may imagine a character with a certain voice, although you possibly also imagine them with a certain face or a certain look, and then you finally see the movie and the voice and the face don't match what you expect and you don't like it. So I get it, it's personal, but honestly, I like voiced NPCs. I don't like voice protagonists for the reasons I've already explained, but I like voice NPCs, and I'm going to go with that. However, I will also accept that that does come at a cost. When you have voiced NPCs, you need to have voice lines recorded. That can restrict the amount of dialogue you can have, because voice lines are expensive and they take a long time to put together, and also they increase the size of the game. Probably not much of an issue anymore, but these are the things that they have to sort of calculate in. So I do understand it might come at a bit of a cost. I just like that cost. I would rather see a little less dialogue and have voiced NPC dialogue than more dialogue but have it be text-based. Complete sentences. Yes, please. Please, 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 please have complete sentences for the dialogue options for the player character. Again, this is going to be personal choice, but I really did not like the kind of dialogue we had in Oblivion, which almost felt like, you know, Hulk speak kind of thing. You just go in and go requirements, and then they would give you an answer, and then you'd say something like trade, and they'd go okay, and you'd trade with them. I can't stand that. And to be honest, Morrowind kind of did that as well. You clicked on words and it provoked a response from the NPC. I much prefer Skyrim's way of doing things where you actually have complete sentences. They may not be the greatest sentences ever, they may not be particularly long and prosaic, but they are sentences. It does mean that that restricts what you can imagine you're saying, but I actually think that's a good thing, because you could say, oh yes, but I clicked requirements and I'm a gentleman, so I said, good sir, what are the requirements for this guild? Whereas if you're playing a stupid warrior, you can imagine your character said, what are the requirements for this guild? So I get the idea that single word options for you give you the option to roleplay what you said. However, they also very often come with very confusing options. You'll say something, you'll pick a word, and the response you get from the NPC is something that doesn't make any sense, because you imagined the one word to mean something different. Maybe actually the option you chose turned out to be sarcastic or nasty, but you didn't read it that way because you just saw a single word. This actually happens quite a lot in some games where you pick the first part of a sentence and then the character actually says 5 more sentences afterwards. Or Fallout 4, where you're given 4 words almost, and then you pick one, and then the character says something. You think, no, that's not what I wanted to say. I want to see what my character is going to say, and whilst I appreciate this does restrict the role-playing aspect, at least I know what I'm saying when I say it. It frustrates me no end not quite knowing which option I'm picking. Dialogue that has an impact in the game world. Now, I want to see quite a lot of this, but I don't want to talk about it in this video, which might sound a little strange because it's pretty important for dialogue. However, those sort of choices that you make when speaking are also heavily intertwined with the subject of questing. Questing and dialogue choices are pretty much, you know, inseparable, and I do want to talk about that subject quite a lot in a video about the quest. So I don't want to talk about it too much beyond just saying, yes, I am a fan of being able to make a choice in dialogue and have it have an effect. Dialogue that has no real impact on the game, it just helps you get a feel for the world. I want to see a lot more of this. This is something I actually think they did better in Skyrim than some of the previous games, although that could be my memory. I felt like there were a few more personal moments in Skyrim, or a few more moments where a character would sort of just come out and say something about another character, and you just got a feel for the interpersonal relationships. You could even eavesdrop on people having these conversations. I want to see more of that. You know, I don't want to just go along and talk to a quest giver and get a quest that will send me to such and such a place, or get some information. I might want to talk to someone near the quest giver, and that quest giver just tells me a story or gives me their opinion regarding that quest giver. Just something to make the game feel more alive.
Do you get to the Cloud District very often? Oh, what am I saying? Of course you don't.
This is one of those areas where I actually would point to a mod such as Inigo as being a good place for inspiration, rather than one of the previous games. Inigo is a follower who comes with a whole heap of brilliant features, which I'm going to discuss in another video when I talk about followers. But one of the things he does do is he will talk about what is going on in game, and it has no effect in game, but it really makes the world come alive, and more importantly, the character come alive. And the more the characters come alive in a game, the more attachment you feel to that particular, world, to that place. And I think that's going to be something I really would like to see a lot more of in the next Elder Scrolls game. Skill checks. I would like far more influence from the skills you have, especially speechcraft, in the dialogue system itself. Skyrim does have the occasional persuasion or intimidate check, but I often feel it's just a little underused. You would find it very difficult to play through Skyrim all the way predominantly using speech, whereas you can play Fallout New Vegas and massively overuse that skill. You could be the sweet talking character. I'd like to see more of that, but I would also like to see skill checks for other skills when you're talking to people. So, perhaps it uses your illusion skill or your restoration skill when talking to a certain mage, and you're trying to convince them that you know what you're talking about. Something like that. I'd prefer to see a lot more of that sort of thing. Now, again, I'm not going to go into great detail about that because I think that's heavily wrapped up in quest design, but I'm a big fan of options opening up with your character development, or options being there all the time, but your chance of success depends on the choices you've made as a character. I think it makes the dialogue more interesting, and of course can make for, different playthroughs playing out in different ways. No minigames, okay? I hate minigames. I'm not a fan of minigames, and the persuasion minigame in Oblivion was just so ridiculous. Not only was it annoying, it made no sense. You started persuading someone and you had to intimidate them, tell a joke, admire, and something else, right? You had to do all four, and depending on the order you did it, depended on how you influenced their... It was awful, and it just removed any sense of having a conversation. Morrowind did it better. There you go. Morrowind fans, I've said it. Morrowind did it better. You could bribe them for a certain amount, or you could admire them, or could you intimidate? It was just simple options, and it was based upon your player's skill. Yes, thank you. Do that. That damned minigame. I'm glad the minigame did not make it over to Skyrim. It's if you try to persuade or intimidate it, it does some sort of internal random check, and you either succeed or you fail. And yes, please, that's how I want it. And finally, the dialogue system itself, and by that I mean the mechanics of the dialogue, the way you interact with it. And this one is one where I'm really torn but I'm probably going to come down on the side of Skyrim and Oblivion. They had a far more standardized dialogue system where there's a list of options, you choose an option and it branches out to other options, and you can choose those as well. Morrowind had a dialogue system that was actually a lot more interesting, and on paper seemed like it could really work well and should have produced far more engaging conversations, but in actuality tended not to. For those of you that don't know, in Morrowind you talk to an NPC and they'll say something, and some of the words will be highlighted and will be purple. They look like you can click them, and that's because you can. You click on one of those words and then you essentially obviously ask a question based upon that word. You don't know what that question is, as I've mentioned, but then the NPC will then give you another sentence, and in that sentence there may be a few more words appear, and you could look at it and go, oh right, this has opened a new avenue. So it seemed kind of similar to, say, the Oblivion and Skyrim system. It's got a branching set of options that open up. It's just presented in a different way. And when you first start engaging with it, it is kind of fun. As you go through the conversation, new options open up. However, you start finding yourself reading the text and then thinking, okay, which other option did I not get? And then you go back up a few conversation points and, oh yeah, that was the other one that opened up, and you click on that, and then a new sentence appears at the bottom, and maybe you've got some new options now. On the right hand side, a list of those clickable words also appears, and so you can try and go through there and see if you've missed any, instead of going back through the conversation, and click there to continue the conversation. But it starts to feel more formulaic and less like a conversation. It is essentially a hypertext document with new links constantly appearing. The problem is, because I got fed up of going up and down, rereading sentences I said to try and remind myself of which options I'd not selected yet, I would get a sentence with, say, 2 or 3 links, and I would click all 3, and then I would read the next sentence, the first one that had appeared, and if there were any links, click those. Then I would read the second sentence that appeared from the first line and read that, and then click the links, and I would do that. And so what I would be doing is, instead of going down a branch of a conversation, I would go down all 3 branches of a conversation to the first level, and then the next level, and all those conversations, so that I didn't have to keep scrolling up and down to try and figure out what I was reading. And then when that got a little bit annoying, I started to actually just click the links as fast as I could, and looking at the right hand side to see which new options came, and then click on those. And what I would do is I would read the sentences that were new and I'd not seen before very, very quickly, and then go to the next option on the right hand side and click it. And after a while I'd got really, really good at this, and I mean really good. I can read text extremely quickly, and what I would basically do was walk up to an NPC and then just start clicking on all of the links on the right hand side, and if something moved on the right hand side, I knew a new link had appeared, and I'd go back and I'd quickly click them all again until I'd got all the way to the bottom and nothing new was appearing, and then I'd go and read all the text. And I knew that I wouldn't really be doing anything that would cause problems. I wasn't ever going to upset anyone, as long as I didn't hit like bribe, admire or intimidate, which were totally separate areas. If it was just clicking on the section for information, I could just click every option and then read through the wall of text and very quickly see if there was something that I had not read before. And that is indeed how I ended up playing Morrowind. I would speed read entire conversations where I'd selected every single solitary option, because it was just the most efficient way of going through the conversation. And the very fact that I just said that I wanted to get through the conversation the most efficient way is a bad sign. And this is why, although on paper I quite liked the system, in theory, in actuality I found the conversations in Skyrim more engaging because I would select a line of conversation, I would say something, and then the NPC would say something back to me, and we would keep going backwards and forwards like a normal conversation. Skyrim and Oblivion felt like you were having a conversation. You could argue they weren't the greatest conversations, but it was still a conversation. In Morrowind, I wasn't. I was speed reading a HTML document, a hypertext document with links. That's how it felt. And it took me out of those conversations quite a lot. So, sorry to the Morrowind fans, but this is one where I'm going to say, do it the way Skyrim did it. And in fact, if you actually look at most modern RPGs, even the great ones like The Witcher, they do it the same way. That formula seems to work. You have a list of options, you choose a sentence, and the conversation moves on that way. The system they used in Morrowind, I don't think it's been used again, at least. Oh no, you know what? It's probably been used. There's probably been loads of games that have used that, but I would say of the games I play, the Skyrim-esque or Oblivion-esque options seems to have won over, and I'm kind of happy about that. Oh, I said finally for the last one, but actually there is one thing I missed, and that is character. And I don't mean the player character. I mean the character of the conversation, the feel, the vibe, the style. Perhaps style would have been a better way to describe this. When you think of games like Witcher 3, the dialogue was intense, it was emotional, it was almost epic at times. Do I want to see something like that in the next Elder Scrolls game? And the answer is not really. Even though I love the writing in games like Witcher 3, I loved the writing in Mass Effect and Dragon Age Origins, I kind of like, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I don't want the same quality of writing in the Elder Scrolls 6. I would love to see writing of that quality, but I don't want quite the epic, serious, dramatic feel to the dialogue that those games had. Elder Scrolls for me has always been a little tongue-in-cheek, a little less serious. Not quite as tongue-in-cheek as, say, Fallout, but it's always been a little easy to meme the Elder Scrolls dialogue, and I don't actually want that to change. I don't want the dialogue to take itself quite as seriously as some other games. Great games that I loved, you know, Witcher 3, best game ever. I still want Elder Scrolls to feel like the Elder Scrolls, and that means the dialogue is going to have to be somewhat different. You can look at a mod like Enderall to see Skyrim, the engine, totally overhauled and given dialogue that is really intense, really dark, far more epic, far more emotional, and it worked brilliantly, and Enderall is superb. But it's a total conversion mod, it's not the Elder Scrolls, it's not set in Tamriel, and when it comes down to it for the Elder Scrolls 6, I want more guards saying things like someone stole your sweet roll. I want the dialogue to occasionally be light-hearted. I want it to occasionally be a little cheesy, and I want it to stay in character with the Elder Scrolls. I want to sit down, play the Elder Scrolls, and recognise the Elder Scrolls dialogue instantly, even if you're the sort of person who's now screaming, "You mean crap?" Whatever it is you want to call it, I don't want a Dragon Age Origins experience from my Elder Scrolls game. I want an Elder Scrolls experience, and thus, in character, in style, I still need the Elder Scrolls dialogue. Stop, criminal scum! I need the occasional thing like that. I just do.
Add a couple hairs to a Nord, and you've got a bear.
And that really was finally. So yeah, that is it for this video. I will of course be making another video in this series, as you've already heard me talking about some subjects. I will be trying to get that out in the next week, maybe 2 weeks, and I would love it if you could join me for that video and give me some feedback. I look forward to seeing you on that video, or any of my other videos of course, and until then, remember as always, have fun.